this is contrary to a system in which we need shares that are attributed to various companies, and the only solution here is to allow various types of shares to exist. And in colored coins terminology, types of shares or types of units will be called colors, and here, by unit type, I basically need some name for all the shares of one particular company. Next slide, please. A new unit type can be created by anyone who has the software, and the creation of a new unit type can be seen as an act of incorporation. Now, I would like to point out specifically that unit types are not units, because after the creation of a new type, one creates units themselves, and that is the difference from the colored coins approach, because as far as I understand in colored coins, you don't really have, you don't create your own units, but rather just assign colors to them. And in the fork that I'm proposing, you do create your own units, and in a moment you'll see why it's important. But ultimately, it is the founder of the company who issues shares. He decides on how many units to issue, and in general, next slide, please. In general, it should be irrelevant how many units he decides to issue. So whether it's 1,000 or 1 million would in no way affect the initial price of a single unit, which is going to be zero anyway until the first purchase. Now, the important thing, of course, is that after the initial issuances, there should be no more additional issuances so as to prevent share dilution. And that is unless otherwise specified in the rules. And now I'm going to talk about the most important part of the idea, the rules and how they are implemented. Next slide, please. In Bitcoin, as soon as units arrive and transactions are confirmed, the money are yours and you are free to do whatever you want with them. And it should be slightly less so with shares, because shares may have certain rules created by founders that may affect how future shareholders can distribute their shares. And those rules, obviously, they will be reflected in and will affect the price of each unit of this type. And because we're talking about software now, it's obvious we can't just have arbitrary rules. Somebody has to implement them. So if you are familiar with object-oriented programming terminology, I'm going to use it a little bit right now. I think we should have like classes or types of shares, which are rules, classes or types of rules that are implemented. Can you see the next slide, please? That are implemented by actual developers of the software, and then those types of rules are instantiated into actual rules by those who issue shares, that is by founders. And I realize it sounds a little bit ambiguous and theoretical here, so let me give you an example so maybe you would instantly understand what I'm talking about. So let's say an entity may wish to appear loyal to its potential shareholders by creating a rule that says it's impossible to transfer more than 30% of shares from one address to another in a single day without the approval of the holders of the rest of 70% of shares. And this kind of rule, it may limit options for insider trading, and it would allow a company to find just the right balance, just the right combination to attract the maximum and the right kind of capital. Next slide, please. And so in this example, a type of rule is disallow transfer of shares from one address to another without the approval of shareholders. And the actual rule that is built upon it is built upon it by adding values such as how many shareholders, during what period of time, and from which addresses. Another example could be when a founder sets a rule by which shares, when offered for sale, should first be offered to a particular address, and at the same or lower price. And obviously this price aspect of this rule, it may require external verification from the Bitcoin blockchain or some stock exchanges and so on. Yet another rule may state to which degree a single share is divisible. And this is an interesting rule that, in combination with the number of shares that is actually issued, it may be a good instrument in controlling how many shareholders a company can have. And obviously, then it helps controlling the balance of power within the entity between its shareholders. And finally, we can probably imagine a rule that says it's impossible to change rules unless 99% of shareholders agree with that. And next slide, please. So the rule system allows for various combinations of powers to exist for various entities, and those rules are set before a single share is issued. And those who buy shares, they implicitly and voluntarily agree to those rules. And because they agree to those rules voluntarily, that means that those rules are seen not as a burden, which usually happens in the current legal system, but rather as a means of attracting capital. Next slide, please. Even more important is that the enforcement of those rules lies in the technical implementation of the protocol, and thus those rules cannot be changed through procedures not agreed upon beforehand. Most importantly, it becomes really easy, much easier to navigate those rules, and a lot less costly to navigate them, precisely for what reason I just mentioned. So a question can be raised. Who guarantees a shareholder really owns a part of the company? And in the current legal framework, ultimately it is the government who does this, but the paperwork government has to review in order to determine whether this individual really owns a share in a company is ideologically no different from the blockchain of transactions we have in Bitcoin or the one that we might have in the proposed system. What's different is the cost of enforcement of what's written on a piece of paper or in the blockchain, and the reliability of the enforcement. And in the case of the proposed system, it's obvious that in many cases those rules are applied automatically, and the cost of enforcing them is zero. So, and in other cases when those rules are not cannot be applied automatically, that would probably mean that we might use some, they can be enforced with the help of the agreed upon mediator. Well, that would be it for my talk today. Final slide, please. My only hope is that it sparked at least a couple of ideas in your heads, and maybe some of you would come up with an even better vision, or maybe an actual product. And I understand that we now have some time for questions, so if you have any, we'd be happy to answer them. Yes, please.
I have a couple of questions, but in the interest of fairness, I'll only ask the first one.
Okay.
Bitcoin has this problem with the UTXO set, the unconfirmed transactions that everybody has to continue to remember, or the unspent transactions that everybody has to continue to remember to know that when they get spent, that was a valid operation. And the fact that this is growing, partly because of Satoshi dice, partly because of other factors, turns out that it's creating an increasing load on the network. Do you have any ideas as to when anybody can go onto the network, anybody with a software can create blockchain objects ex nihilo?
Yeah, like shares.
Then, I mean, even in the current situation, there's a worst it can get. If every Satoshi is living at a separate address, that's the absolute worst it can get. If the variety if the quantity of blockchain assets can grow without bound, then the size of the UTXO set can grow without bound. Do you have any ideas as to how to ameliorate that?
Well, I would say that, obviously, correct me if I'm wrong.
Can you summarize for the people online who did not hear that, so wasn't at a mic? That would be good.
I'm sorry, what?
You can summarize the question for the people online.
Repeat the question. Actually, so if I understand it correctly, the question was, would it create a certain problem of spamming the network with, creating various shares? Is that correct?
It's not spamming the network as far as transactions going back and forth, but in the amount of information that the network needs to remember long term.
Right.
In this proposal can grow without bound.
Right. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not exactly like a core Bitcoin developer, so I might not know the answer. However, I do believe that there's a logical solution to that, and those people. I know there are a couple of people on this conference who do have an actual product that does something similar. So they might know better. You might probably be better off asking them. But I think this is the solution could be found. That is not like a major problem, but it is good. Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to comment on your question.
Yeah, this is the guy who actually knows lots of people probably answer.
Okay, the question was like, if the unspent transaction output pool grows beyond the limits, it will cause a problem.